that I always enjoy discussing, enjoy contributing to on citizen-generated data, and particularly here in Kenya. We have a packed agenda, but I'd also encourage participants to introduce yourselves in the chat window, your name, your organization, and if you may, what you're hoping to learn from today's session. Our agenda, as I mentioned, is quite packed. We'll start with a few, actually 2 remarks or keynote speakers. We have 2 keynote speakers for SDG Forum. We'll start with some remarks, and then we'll hear from KNBS around the work that they've been doing on citizen data, and then from Paris 21. And then we'll go into speaking to some of the actors on citizen-generated data institutions. So we'll have Dennis Njuge from GROOTS, and then we'll have Sarah Wasonga from Article 19, Benjamin Charago from the Open Institute, and Agnes Nakuru from Africa Voices Foundation. So after that, we'll open the floor for any questions for the participants, for the speakers rather, and then we'll do some closing remarks. So I'd encourage you to ask your questions as early as now. We don't need to wait for the Q&A session to drop the questions. So I'd encourage you to introduce yourself, but also, ask your questions using the chat option. So without further ado, I'll want to invite Festus Odingo from the SDG Kenya Forum to give his opening remarks. Over to you, Festus, and you have about 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Karen, for your eloquent intro to this event. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm quite grateful that you've made it this far to have this discussion, which is quite timely. And mine was just to say that this is under the auspices of the Economic and Social Council, and it's been an establishment through the United Nations High-Level Political Forum on the sustainable development. And I would probably just move and say that as part of its follow-up and review mechanisms, the 2030 agenda really encourages member states to conduct some regular and inclusive reviews of progress at the national and subnational levels. And we as a country, Kenya, we also subscribe to such mandates, and these national reviews are usually expected to serve as a basis for regular reviews by the HLPF, and maybe as stipulated in certain paragraphs within the 2030 agenda. These regular reviews normally are quite voluntary, state-led, and then also undertaken by both state and non-state actors, and always provides some kind of a platform for partnerships and participation by major groups. And I think it's under that provision that I think we are all here to check and look into the level of implementation of certain goals. And this year, the review actually is on 5 goals. That's SDG 4 that speaks about quality education, SDG 5 that mentions gender equality, SDG 14 that talks about life below water, 15 life on land, and 17 that speaks basically on how to strengthen the means of implementation and how to revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development goals. And that is where actually this is anchored, our conversation around citizen-generated data. Under goal 17, we have, I think, about 24 indicators, about 19 targets. And we'd want to see how the data work in the Kenyan space really contributes to meeting the needs, the data needs and gaps that exist within our space. And that's by that nature actually is also will help us in the reporting processes when it comes to the voluntary national reviews and so on and so forth. And I know a lot has happened that probably some of us are not aware, and I'm very quite glad that both James and Paul will take us through, and you'll definitely see for yourself that the CSOs are actually doing quite a great stride in terms of data production, data use, data supply, and so on and so forth. So this conversation is very timely, and I think I'll just wish you speakers all the best. And in that, feel free to ask your questions. We have the technocrats to answer you. Thank you so much. Karen.
Thank you so much, Festus, and thanks for the remarks. And as always, we truly appreciate the work of the SDG Forum in bringing together civil society and non-state actors on key issues like CGD and others. So we'll move straight now to our keynote speakers. We'll start with James Kinyanjui, who is the Senior Manager, Sampling Methods and Standards at KNBS, and he'll give us, the KNBS experience on CGD and, of course, on filling data gaps and the data challenges. So, James, you'll have 20 minutes, and if you see me come on video, just know your time is running out, so you're probably having like another 2 minutes or so. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Karen and Festus, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're able to see my presentation.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm going to take you through the use of alternative sources of data for official reporting. My name is James Nganga Kinyanjui. I work for Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. First of all, I want to take us through the KNBS mandate, and KNBS is a state corporation that was established through an act of parliament, Statistics Act number 4 of 2006. KNBS is the principal agency for government for collecting, analyzing, and disseminating statistical data in Kenya. And it is also the custodian of official statistical information in Kenya. KNBS has a number of responsibilities. I've only picked a few, and one of them is planning and coordinating official statistical programs within the national statistical system. KNBS also is tasked with establishing standards and ensuring use of best practices. This speaks to the quality of data that is produced within the national statistical system. And also, ultimately, KNBS is supposed to ensure that whatever data that is produced within the national statistical system is designated as official so that it can be used by government and other partners for planning purposes. Coming to the national statistical system, you may be asking yourself, what is this national statistical system is all about? And this is made of statistics unit and institutions that develop and produce and disseminate official statistics on behalf of the government, both at national level and county level. And also, so this means that the constitution of the NSS comprises of all the ministries, departments and agencies of government and county government, together with the county governments, that are in the business of collecting or serving the citizenry, and in the process of serving the citizenry, they are able to produce some statistics or a number of statistics that can be used for planning. So in this regard, beyond that, then the NSS does not operate in vacuum, but then there are stakeholders of NSS who include the users of the data that are produced within the NSS. The development partners are also users that use the data that is produced by NSS, the media, the academia, and also the civil society organizations are also the users of data that is produced within NSS and the general public. And as you can see, KNBS is the coordinator of the national statistical system. And there are several ministries, as the picture depicts, of course, agriculture, health, labor, education, trade, and so many others, which comprises the national statistical system. Now, KNBS as a coordinator of the NSS does that. It is mandated by law, as I said, Statistics Act. One of the responsibilities is to coordinate the programs, statistical programs within the NSS. And this, the KNBS does by providing liaison between KNBS and other institutions in the NSS and beyond, developing and implementing of the Kenya strategy for development of statistics, which seeks to mainstream statistics within the development agenda of a nation. Then establishing technical working committees on various thematic areas, including an alternative sources of data, such as CGD. So KNBS also is tasked with establishing these committees. There are a number of them that are in place. And we are in the process of trying to come up with one on CGD. We are trying to further the use of CGD as official statistics, and therefore we felt it is very important that we come up with a technical working group that is going to be in charge of CGD and ensuring that the CGD is fit for use for official reporting. Then the other thing that we do is mainstreaming data availability for reporting on SDGs. We try to look at the SDG framework, the number of indicators that exist, and the data that is available so that it can be used to report on those indicators that are in the SDG. Then we ensure that the national statistical programs and activities are aligned to the regional, continental, and international statistical principles and frameworks. In undertaking its work, the Bureau relies on various data sources, mostly traditional sources. It has always been traditional sources. This includes the census. You could recall that we undertook one in 2019 where you enumerate the entire population, or surveys where you take a sample of the population and study that population, and then whatever results you get, you are able to extrapolate to the entire population. So in this case, we have a number of surveys that we take. I've just highlighted only two. That is Kenya Demographics and Health Surveys and Kenya Integrated Household Budget Survey. But there are so many other surveys that we undertake ourselves as KNBS or in collaboration with various other institutions. Then we also rely on administrative records, which relates to data that is collected by various institutions as they fulfill their mandate. So in this case, then we look at the data that has been collected there and compile it for it to be used for official reporting or as official statistics. Most of these activities, as I said, are undertaken in collaboration with various stakeholders. And coming to statistics demand and why we may require to use alternative data sources, is that we have a number of agenda that has been put in place. This includes the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. You are all aware of the sustainable development goals. Then we have the Agenda 2063, which is an African agenda for the Africa that we want. At national level, we have, I know all of you are aware of the Vision 2030 that exists, and several other agenda that are meant to drive and spur growth of the country, the region, and world at large. Now, with this, then the demand for data for measuring the progress or monitoring the progress of achievement of this agenda has increased. And this means there's a lot of existing data gaps that needs to be filled because of the number of indicators that exist that require to measure this progress. KNBS, as I said, has been looking or mainstreaming the SDG indicators and trying to fill the data gaps therein. And recently we had a workshop in which we were looking at the indicators that for which we have the data, and therefore we can be able to monitor that. And in this case, then we were able to review the previous indicators that we were monitoring that were 131, and we increased that to 144. In total, the SDG indicators are 231. So it means they are about 80 or so indicators which are yet to have data. Coming to SDG 17 indicators, within the framework, there are those indicators which I've highlighted there, which we continue to or are included in the SDG indicator framework that we have data for. Then this means there's need for more data for monitoring these indicators. As I said, there's a gap of data that requires to fill or to be able to monitor the rest of the indicators, and not just these ones, but also the national agenda and the regional agenda. So this means that then if we are to rely on the traditional data sources, then we may not be able to fulfill or to meet the demand for statistics. And this calls for us to then embrace the alternative sources of data for official reporting. So this is informed by, of course, the number of producers that have increased over years. We have a number of producers within and outside of the NSS that are producing this data. And this is what has led the KNBS to start thinking of how to tap up this data that exists out there with mostly the non-state actors that has previously not been taken advantage of. So in this case, about 5 years or so ago, KNBS started thinking about this, and it was included in the strategic plan that is running, which is a 5-year plan that is currently running for KNBS. And one of the things that we have put in the strategic plan is to ensure that we take advantage of the traditional, non-traditional sources of data, such as the CGD and the big data for official reporting. And in this case, then we have started a journey, I think a year ago, where we started by developing the Kenya Statistical Quality Assurance Framework. And within that statistical assurance, quality assurance framework, we have the CGD quality criteria that is meant to validate data from the CGD, which is mostly produced by the CSOs. The criteria is meant to assess quality of the CGDs as fit for use for official statistics, for especially reporting on SDG. And Kenya, in this regard, having developed the quality criteria for validating CGD, becomes a pioneer in Africa as among one of the countries that has started to go in this direction. Now, looking at the quality criteria, it has nothing other than the quality of statistics. Now, when you look at quality of statistics, it has 8 dimensions. For you to say that the statistics that you've developed or the data that you have is of quality, then it must meet the need of the users, must be interpretable and clear, credible, relevant, timely, must be produced in a timely manner, must be accessible. The methods thereof that you've used to produce that data must be sound, and the data then must be accurate. So for this case then, the Bureau developed the quality criteria, which incorporates these quality dimensions. And to be able to measure whether the data that is out there, the alternative source of data that is out there, whether it is of high quality, then there is a score that is allocated for each of these quality dimensions. And we have 3 for very high. That means it meets, for instance, if you're looking at the need, it meets the need. the users need medium, low, or 0 if it doesn't meet at all, or if it doesn't fulfill the various requirements within each of these dimensions. So at the end of the day, after evaluating using the quality criteria, then an average score is then assigned by summing up the total scores and dividing them by the 8 quality dimensions. So each of the quality dimensions is applied to the data that is provided by the CSO, and out of the 8, then a score is given and divided by 8. So this is the process of reviewing the data before it can be accepted as fit for use for official reporting. And one of the things, out of the 8 quality dimensions, there are 3 which we call as the quality gateway dimensions. And these are interpretability and clarity, and then credibility and trust and need. And as you can see, for the data to continue to be evaluated, then it must pass these 3 quality dimensions. That means, for instance, it must be interpretable, it must have data set, must have metadata, code book, it must have survey instruments, ethical approvals if there is requirement for that, and study report are provided. Otherwise, if such are not provided for interpretability and clarity, quality gateway dimension, then it means it's going to fail. So if the data provided by a CSO passes all 3 quality gateway dimensions, then it goes ahead to be evaluated using the rest of the quality dimensions. Otherwise, if it fails in any of these 3, then we may not be able to pass it over to the next stage for evaluation. And now the next stage of evaluation involves the rest of the quality dimensions. I said there are 8, so it means once it passes the first 3, then it is subjected now to the rest of the 5 quality dimensions. And each of the 5 quality dimensions can either be given a 3, that is how it meets every requirement of each of the dimensions, or can be given 2, that means there are few of them which are not met, or 1, meaning majority of them are not met, or 0, meaning that none of the requirement for a specific quality dimension are not met. So in this case then, at the end of it all, after you have passed it through the 5 quality dimensions, then an average score, that means you add up for the 5 quality dimensions, you add up and then divide by 5, and then you get an average score. So again, even if it had passed the quality dimensions, the quality gateway dimensions, but here it falls below 1.5 average, then it means, again, it may not be used for official reporting. So this is the process of evaluating the CGD for us to be able to use that CGD for official reporting. Now, how do we overcome the data quality issues so that we can use the CSOs data or the CGD for official reporting? Maybe we may need to look at what causes data to be of poor quality. One of the things that may cause that is lack of involvement of stakeholders and lack of collaborating with the various stakeholders. That means you may not know what exists or what does not exist. You go ahead and start producing data that is already existing there. Since you were not involving stakeholders. And probably, again, you may measure some indicators in the wrong way because some stakeholders are the ones involved with that indicator and they know how to measure it. So in this case, then stakeholders' involvement is very key. Then openness, which means when you are producing your data, it is important to document every process of your production of that statistics. And again, once that statistics are produced, then you need to be able to share data. So in most cases, this is what causes poor quality. Then expertise gap, you realize that a number of people or institutions, organizations engage in research, and yet they do not have the expertise to guide the process. Then the other thing that causes this is lack of methodological rigor, especially when sampling. So you realize that people just collect data out there. They regard it as a probability sampling, but when you review the method that has been used, then there is no rigor at all in that methodology. And how then do we overcome these challenges? One of the things is that we need to approach the data collection or researches as a collaborative approach between government and CSOs so that we can be able to close the gaps and have data that is of quality. Then production of data in line with the quality dimensions. The quality criteria that has been developed by KNBS in collaboration with Paris 21, GSPDD, and also some CSOs will be shared with all the CSOs so that they can be able to adhere to what is required there, and can also self-assess themselves to see what data, that the data they produce is of high quality. Finally, the Bureau has availed itself by availing technical support in research design. So we are available to provide that support. We are available to provide the data collection infrastructure. We have county statistics officer across all the counties, the 47 counties, and these ones are available to support the CSOs in data collection. We have CGD guidelines which are available that can guide the CSOs to when they are planning and also undertaking data collection, analysis, and producing these statistics. Then, as I said earlier on, there is KeSQAF, CGD quality criteria, that is available for use to assess data. So CSOs can assess themselves in terms of the data that they have. KNBS adopts an open door policy for continued collaboration and partnerships with the CSOs, so that then you can come to KNBS, the CSOs can come to the KNBS, we can provide all this support that I have mentioned and can link you with the relevant technical working groups as provided for within the NSS, so that then that support can be availed. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't go beyond my time, Karen.
No, you haven't. You're just right on time, James. So thank you so much for that. It's always exciting to listen to KNBS talk about CGD in a very powerful way. So thank you so much, James. And also thanks to colleagues from KNBS who have joined this meeting. I think there are a couple of questions that have come up. I think particularly the one on the sampling frame, which I'll come back to you, James, to respond to after Paul has spoken. If other participants have more questions to James and to KNBS, please put them in the chat and we'll address them after Paul's presentation. So I'll now invite Paul Mungai, Dr. Paul Mungai, who is the national consultant for Paris 21 and who is supporting KNBS in implementing CGD work. So Paul, you have 15 minutes. And as you have seen the style, when my camera comes on, then you have about 2 minutes to wrap up. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. It's always a pleasure. I am privileged to speak on this issue of operationalization of CGD. I've been serving as a national consultant, supporting KNBS on this process, thanks to funding from Paris 21. So my contract actually comes from Paris 21. And I think this is one of the things that perhaps puts Kenya on the map, because I think it's not an easy process to actually do this. And this is why I think this discussion is very necessary. So we're going to talk about a few things. So we'll look at the issue of dialogue. How do we strengthen this? How do we strengthen knowledge exchange? There's also going to be an issue what what makes this process work. Like now, for instance, it's more or less a reflection of what has actually happened. So there might be other frameworks that people have used, but this is actually very, very customized to the KNBS process. So with regard to dialogue, one of the things that I find that's very critical is building mutual trust between state and non-state actors. So with this, there's need for clear guidelines with regards to quality, the issue of quality. So what constitutes quality? I think James has mentioned this. You would find that there are discrepancies, especially when it comes to reporting and even actual design of a project. So people will loosely say that this is the methodology they're using, but it actually is not. So, and also the other thing that's very critical is workflow and engagement channels. So most of these projects are actually time bound. So if, for instance, one wants KNBS support, so how does this happen? If it is at the stage of just reviewing work that has already been done, what KNBS has done is that it has come up with a CGD scoring workflow. So you basically get to know all the stages that that process will take place. And perhaps one thing that you may need to do is to actually have define the turnaround time, so that we know when one submits, then it takes 3 weeks, for instance, for this to come back, especially because of project timelines. The other thing that's very critical is to have a standardized quality framework. So KNBS has this, and that's supported by the score allocation matrix. So the presentation that James gave, there were those quality dimensions that were indicated. So each of those dimensions, there's a weight to it. And there's also what we called the minimum threshold, for instance. So you get to know what, if for instance, you score 0 on one of the dimensions, that means that data can actually not be used for official reporting. But it doesn't mean that your work is wrong. It just is falling short. So it can still be used for the reporting that for the project work. But when it comes to KNBS, they may not be able to use this information. However, the kind of feedback you get should be detailed in a way that you're able to review your processes, and the next project you are undertaking, you're able to tick all the boxes. And this again now goes to the issue of trust. So when this engagement is happening, there's going to be a level of trust that's being built between the non-state actors and KNBS in this particular issue. Yeah, and then the other one that's very critical is having a common understanding on the existing data gaps. So we have quite a number of indicators. So what has happened, for instance, this year is that KNBS has shared the indicators that they are falling short in. So what that helps the non-state actors is to know where their focus can be, especially if they're having projects that they have more leeway on their activities. So that also helps people to there's more collaboration that comes out of that. And again, that's an element of trust, because if for instance, this process starts with them coming up with a draft project design, and then sharing this with the research design, and then sharing this with KNBS, and then KNBS reviewing them and helping them to refine, and when they go to the field and collect the data, it actually meets their purpose, then again, trust is enhanced in that way. The other one that's necessary is access to information, especially when you now think about data users. So what kind of channels are we going to create that allow citizens to access the data that's being generated, especially non-official data? Yeah, so is this data going to be available? When we did a survey, some of the organizations were actually saying that this data is available upon request. So the question is, like, why is it that some of this data can only be available upon request and not publicly accessible without even having to send an email, because again, that is a roadblock to access. So those are issues that will need to be streamlined. And of course, there's also the advantage of if for instance you do a project and KNBS goes ahead and also uses it for reporting, then the impact for that project is even higher. So and then we could also ask ourselves a question: what if also the public, people who we didn't anticipate to be users of this data, got to use this data? So that's an issue when you think about dialogue. So dialogue for me is that issue of engagement where people are able to engage or interact during that process of collection, that process of use, in a seamless way, and also in a very structured format, such that people don't have to shoot in the dark. When you're starting a project, you don't know how to go about it. Yeah. The other thing that's very critical is how to strengthen knowledge exchange. So I did put this as a first point, that is adequate funding and technical support, because one of the things that we realize, and something I've mentioned on another slide, is that CGD is actually introducing new or additional work for KNBS in particular. And we are very grateful for the support, for instance, that we've received so far. Like now the role I play with this process. So thanks to Paris 21. There's also the Paris 21 itself, Flemish government, JZ, GPSTD, SDG Kenya, UN Women, they've been supporting a lot of the activities, especially when we were going through the process of developing these criteria. Yeah, and that was just the beginning. Now we are at the stage of implementing these quality criteria, and also that requires work, because there's need for a lot of training. So some of the workshops we've gone through, we've got to a point where now KNBS is actually the one that is building capacity. But then again, as I said before, this is additional work. So there's need for additional discussion on this, especially when we start thinking about sustainability. And then we also need supportive laws and policies. So this should be internal. So internal, for instance, in the case of KNBS, they have incorporated the CGD criteria within KeSQAF. So they already have a policy that supports this process, you know, looking at it from a national point. Again, KeSQAF applies, but also we have, for instance, the access to information. So what policies are there? What laws are there? I think Kenya is not in a bad state. So this is something that one would need to consider when you're doing this, for instance, in another country. And then stakeholder engagement or consultation. This is really critical. One of the things that made the project in Kenya a success is the fact that there was a lot of collaboration between state and non-state actors, and that's why there's a lot of ownership with regard to this quality assurance framework. So the CGD quality criteria is something that now KNBS embraces, and also the non-state actors have also started to adapt, and this helps as well, because we won't see we don't expect to see now another CGD quality framework emerging, because we have this one, which is actually a living document. So we'll keep improving it as time goes. And then the other one is the need for quality guidelines, frameworks, or templates for standardization. So one of the things that we've realized, especially when we were trying to score some of the data sets that had been provided by non-state actors, is that it is actually hard to score some of these reports or data sets. Because they don't follow a given template, especially the reports, and also the data itself. For instance, the metadata being data describing the data that you're trying to look at, you know. So there's a lot of gaps. So what is happening now is we're at the stage where we are trying to think through. So is the quality guideline enough? One of the recommendations was perhaps we need a template for reports, such that someone knows that this particular part needs to be there within the report, defined explicitly, you know, especially when it comes to methodology. Yeah. And then we also need a clear workflow. So we already have a workflow for scoring CGD. So if you're doing some work, you know exactly what processes, what stages your data will go through, you know, and that helps you also knowing on how to follow up. You know, and that goes back to the issue I was saying about the turnaround time. So perhaps once we have reviewed a few, then we'll be able to do an actual estimate and say that this kind of work requires this much time. But then again, it also falls back to the issue of capacity. So do we have, will people be able to find time in their busy schedules, especially KNBS staff, to do this kind of reviews? So how does this happen over the course of a year, you know? And then the other one that's very critical is the quality assurance team. So this is something that James mentioned. So that technical working group on CGD is something that is in process, but it will actually help also on the issue of sustainability. So this working group will also constitute of non-state actors, you know, so, and this will be on rotation basis. And one of the things that we've said is perhaps also the partners can actually support this particular working group. So if you could have support, then this guarantees sustainability. And then another one that's very important for knowledge exchange is these webinars, these workshops, especially where we're actually reviewing each other's data. So again, it goes back to the issue of trust. So you get to see that, oh, we are all at the same stage, or some of us have advanced, and then also you can see the value. Like now, most of the non-state actors that we are scoring very highly have been consulting with KNBS before. But now what this process does is that it is actually opening the gates for more organizations. Now, a lot more of organizations which don't belong to the state know how to actually do this engagement with KNBS. So which actually promotes the quality of data. And then another one that's critical is collaboration on data collection activities or during program design. One of the things that we realize is that a lot of the data sets may not be useful by KNBS because of issues like now coverage. So you find it's not possible for them to use a report for national reporting because it is only based on a small constituency. But what if 2 or 3 organizations came together and then they jointly had the same design of a research project, and then they went ahead? So even if they're going to work in different constituencies, but when this report is brought together, then KNBS can actually use it for future reporting. So those kinds of thinking where we have more partnerships, yeah. And then the other issue is on how to design data systems purposefully for individual and collective agency. So there's need for common purpose. So this goes back to the point I was just discussing. So KNBS is actually working hard in helping identify the national data gaps based on various indicators. Actually, James highlighted a few. So we then need to get to a level where people who are producing data, people who go to the field and collect data, can access this information. It might sound like something very easy to do, but one of the ways to resolve this is basically having an inventory of data producers, which KNBS has now, and it's a living database. So they will keep improving and adding the organizations in that inventory. And what happens is any communication that comes out, for instance, on this issue of data gaps, is shared to all these organizations. Yeah. So what happens is then these organizations, with support, for instance, from organizations like SDG Kenya, they can then work on projects jointly. You know, so perhaps one of the things that SDG Kenya can do is keep reviewing what indicators organizations are doing and try to help in building this collaboration, especially when it comes to data production. And then the other one that's key is stakeholder engagement. So I've talked about these engagement channels between the data producers, especially how to get support from KNBS. And another one that's very critical is on data governance. So I reflected on what exists within KNBS at the moment. KNBS now has the quality assurance framework. So it is something that they are using in managing CGD, and it is also something that is also being used now by non-state actors in getting to know how to manage this data, because a lot of the organizations will actually or should create their own policies, or rather something that guides them on this process, so it's more or less localizing yeah. And then another thing that's very critical is defining roles and responsibilities. So the kind of outputs we've had from this process, for instance, the quality assurance framework, the workflow, it is helping identify various roles, and out of that, then one of the questions, like now, for instance, if I think about KNBS, one of the things they'll be asking themselves is, do you have capacity? Like, who can do this? So even if that work is going to be shared amongst the current team, then we ensure that people get to know what their role is. And then the other one that's critical is establishing a governing body. So the technical working group, which is under formulation, is something very critical. Yeah, and then when you think about system design, having that common quality assurance framework is quite critical, because then it resolves those quality concerns. One of the things that we picked up is that during a survey we conducted end of last year, is that, for instance, a lot of CSOs work is focused on gender, so that means that, and that actually informed what Paris 21 would support for this year. So that was basically trying to see what indicators, for instance, are there, need to be addressed from a gender perspective, and working with that. So again, that is part of the design issue, but also when it comes to quality, again, the quality assurance framework helps in standardization. And then there's also the issue of data use. So do we have a clear criteria on how CGD can be analyzed and used, especially because this helps in creating demand, because one of the issue, and I think maybe that's something that will need to be considered next year, is on the demand for this data beyond use by the state. Yeah. So how can we support this? So that's another discussion. And I think GPSCD has been working on such issues. And then the other one is sustainability. So I did talk about the need to support the technical working group. So I mentioned in brief about the need to continuously offer technical support, especially for data producers at this stage, so that we actually have a significant pool of data sets that are addressing specific indicators. And also that also talks to the issue of having a common purpose. So if people can actually come together and fill existing needs. Yeah. So how can government build trust?
Well, I'll need you to start wrapping up. Yeah, this is just last slide.
Okay, I think this is, yeah, so on this issue, I think it's just a repetition. So there's need for transparency. I think we've talked about how that can be achieved. There's also the issue of capability. So we need to think about the workload and the like, KPIs, review them and see whether we can formalize these new tasks that are coming in as part of CGD within the existing workforce. And then also reliability. So having a clear workflow, people getting to know the turnaround time, and also communication. So this data, this inventory of data producers will be helpful in ensuring that people get information on time. Yeah, thank you. That's all. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you so much, Paul. I think that was really useful and helpful, particularly for organizations that are hearing this information for the first time. I want to just spend like another 4 minutes or so to just take or respond to some questions, ask some questions for you, James and Paul. And I'll start with you, James, because there's a question that has come from the African Institute of Children around the sampling frame. I think it would be good to just let participants know, do people have access to the sampling frame from KNBS? If they need to access that, what's the process? And then, you know, I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of a participant who's hearing all this information for the first time. If I've joined this meeting for the first time and I'm really interested in being part of the process, what do I need to do after this meeting? You know, what's the key thing that I need to do? So I'll start with you, James. Paul, the question is the same for you. What does a participant who's hearing this information for the first time, or who is in this meeting, what do they need to do if they want to be part of this process? And then, you know, there's been a question on if the data that is produced is not only for national reporting, are there mechanisms? Are we thinking about having like a repository or a place where CGD sits so that others can use it or can access it for programming? I think right now the method or the approach has been organizations, as they produce their data, put it on their websites, and you know, there's nothing compelling them to put it on their website. But I think it's just promoting that culture of openness and transparency. Are we thinking about that? I think the question on need, whose need is, you know, you've touched on that, Paul, around, you know, in the coming year, we need to think of, so what if the need is not what KNBS, you know, is looking for? I think the value of quality data is still, you know, of paramount importance. And I think that's something that we'd want to continuously advocate for, even if the data is not going to be used for national reporting. So James, you have 2 minutes, and Paul, you have 2 minutes also.
Okay, thank you, Karen, and thank you for those questions. About the accessibility for the sampling frame, at KNBS we have 2 sampling frames, one for the enterprises and another one for the households. And all that a CSO, anyone who wants to use the sampling frame requires to do is get in touch with KNBS by writing to the Director General. And then once that is received at KNBS, we shall be able to support you in whichever way, through us having a meeting, understanding what your requirement is, and then we shall move forward to support you. As I said, we have county statistics officers across all the 47 counties. In case you want to undertake a study in one of the counties, you will be able to get that support again from one of the county statistics officers. So we have been, and in fact, we've been working with institutions like Twaweza Kenya, whom we have supported them severally by giving them access to the sampling frame. What we do is that you give us the sample design, and then we are able to select the sample for you. Then there was a question on if the data is not for national indicators. Yes, it doesn't matter whether the studies are for the national indicators. So long as we are able to pass it through, or it passes the quality criteria. If it relates to a defined geographic unit like a county, then again, if it passes through that criteria and we are able to be satisfied that it fits the purpose for use, then we can be able to upload it on our website, and eventually other people can be able to access it. I hope those were the 2 questions, Karen, I was to respond to. I don't know whether there's another one.
No, I think, yeah. So the other question you can respond in the chat is if you charge for the sampling frame and how much that costs. I think that you could respond to in the chat.
We do not charge for the sampling frame. What you may require to do, because you may require to have, probably if you're talking about the household-based sampling frame, it is structured in a way that we have villages, which we call as clusters. And for you to be able to access those clusters, then you will require a map, which definitely will require to be printed or developed for you. So in that case, then you may be required to pay some sort of charge for that map, which is going to be produced for you. Again, when you go out to the field, you will require to facilitate the team that is going to take you to show you where that cluster is. So for the frame, it is not charged, but of course there is that facilitative amount that you may be required to pay given the products that you're going to be given to support you on that. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Paul, I'll come to you in 1.5 minutes.
Okay. Thanks, Karen. I think the question on I can address that is on that one on the repository. So there's a plan for this to take place. It just needs to be finalized. So, but then again, what will happen is, yes, this data can be available from a repository maintained by KNBS, but also the individual organizations can also share the same. So borrowing a lesson from the Open Data Project, one of the things that was identified, especially by government agencies that had shared their data with on the national platform, the Open Data Portal, is that they realized that there was actually more use of that data compared to them having stored it on their individual websites. So those are lessons that will that actually motivate a thought line on having a common repository. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks to participants for being very engaged and asking many questions. Please keep them flowing. We're now moving to what I'd call part 2 of this webinar, this event, where we want to hear from a number of the organizations that are producing CGD or analyzing and using CGD. So we'll start with Dennis Njuge, the Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Manager at GRUTS. He is definitely going to focus on gender statistics and gender data, and the possible contribution of CGD to their work, especially in complementing official data or even closing some data gaps. Dennis, you also have 10 minutes, and as you've known now, my style is I'll come on video when you have about 2 minutes to go. Over to you, Dennis.
Thank you so much. Am I able to share?
Yes, we can see your presentation. You just need to put it on full screen. Yeah.
Let's go back.
Great.
I hope everyone can be able to see my screen.
Yes.
I think, thank you so much, Karen. Thank you, James and Paul, for the very good remarks. And of course, I really appreciate the kind of work that KNBS has put in. And just before I start, I just wanted to say that I think for the first time since we started working around this work in CGD with the support and leadership of SDGs Kenya Forum and other partners, I think we CSOs have a real opportunity now to be able to share their data and to, of course, learn from each other. With the quality criteria, there is an opportunity for us to be able to produce data that really can be able to support the Bureau to fill the gaps that are existing, particularly in areas that they are not able to produce data for. That said, my name is Dennis, like just been introduced. I work for GRUTS Kenya. I oversee work around monitoring, but also oversee work around data. And I'll be speaking around what, from where we sit, what we see as the possible contributions of CGD to gender data and the statistics ecosystem. Because I think this is really a timely, it's a very good time for us to be speaking about this, because there are many things that we do as CSOs, but we never get the right or quality data to be able to push them out and use them to make decisions and for planning purposes. So GRUTS Kenya, just a brief, is an acronym for Grassroots Organizations Operating Together in Sisterhood. We were founded in 1995, and we are a network of local grassroots women-led organizations, both CBOs and self-help groups. And we are currently working in 21 counties with around 3,500 of those groups. So we work at the lowest level in terms of where the problem is closest. And from that point of view is where I'm going to really discuss why data is central. So we have a couple of goals, and I would sum them up into 4. One, we grow a grassroots movement. So with the 3,500 groups in the 21 counties, we try to grow a stronger movement that can support women to effectively participate in decision-making platforms. We also look at quite a number of aspects in gender injustices. We also look at economic justice and empowerment. And finally, we look at leadership at both political level and appointive level. So, but one thing you realize is that even when you're looking at these goals, then all these goals need data, and data is very central to them for them to be able to function well and for you to be able to make change and impact. So for that, I wanted to just share a bit of our thoughts that are, of course, open to contribution, critique, and of course, addition. On what we feel that this position that we have currently in Kenya, and with our engagement with the Bureau, you know, we have a cordial relationship. I remember a few weeks ago when we were together in Mombasa with the Bureau, someone mentioned that it was a nice time, because initially, if government, particularly the Bureau and civil society organizations, were seated in one seat, there was a bit of tension because no one trusted each other. But for this time, we were there to really, you know, develop and grow something that has come out of our engagement and our continued engagement. So I want to just say, share 6 aspects that we feel that will be very critical and that we see as what will be contributed by CGD, both on SDG reporting, but also at a lower level, because as James has said, it is not necessarily not at the national level, because not so many organizations, CSOs, have the ability to do work at the national level, produce data at a national level. But even within the different geographical locations that we are working with, then I think this will really be important. So one of the main aspects that we feel that will highly be contributed is the granularity of the data. What I mean by that is, if you look at the data sets that are available, particularly the official data sets, they are national in nature, and they provide, for example, if you look at the census report, it provides data, what is published provides data up to the sub-county level. Of course, if you engage with the Bureau, you can be able to get more data that goes to a lower level. But what CGD comes to do is to introduce some level of granularity, because some people are working at ward level, some people are working at sub-county level. So they are able to produce data at the lowest level in which they are working with. And so what that happens is that we have more increased data within lower geographical locations, which for me is a very important thing for decision making, particularly when you look at the devolved systems of government. The second one is, of course, with the granularity, you have more partners involved and more areas covered. And what happens is then we see a possibility of reduced inequality in geographical data representation. So you will find that GROOTS Kenya is working in 21 counties, but it doesn't work in the entire regions of each of the county. So it might be working, for example, if you're in Kitui, you might be working in Kitui South, someone else might be working in Kitui North or Kitui Rural. So then they will be able to produce data within their scope. And of course, that particularly reduces the inequalities within the representation of the data. And of course, with more quality data, with more adherence to the quality gateway dimensions and the scoring matrix, with better data, then we have an opportunity in the future to see more and more data at lower levels of government. The third one is increased non-traditional data sets. Of course, if you look at the Bureau's data, most of it is quantitative in nature. And of course, that's common for many organizations. They will produce quantitative data. But then we have done traditional data sets in qualitative data sets. So with CGD, because of feminist action research methodologies, then we are bound to have much more non-traditional data sets available to us. And of course, with these data sets, what you achieve is that you have a visibility of parameters and variables that were primarily not collected. For example, you would have a bit of understanding of the experiences and narratives of communities, both men and women, in different areas. And this is very important because quantitative data is very important data, but I think there are aspects that we all agree that it leaves out that are needed as we move on to make decisions. The fifth one is the participation of a higher number of stakeholders. And of course, you see the data production ecosystem, the way it's designed, initially, only official data could be used in reporting. But now we have an opportunity for us to be able to use other citizen-generated data. So meaning that organizations at any level at different parts of the country can be able to include more stakeholders as they collect data. And of course, they collect data that has a need to the system. And finally, what we thought and what we feel that the data CGD will do is that we will have a more, an increased number of comparable data sets. One man told me that you can only say data is not good if you have another data set that is comparable to that one. So what will happen is that we see a possibility of increased data sets. And with these increased data sets collecting certain variables, then you will see more comparability, which supports the data ecosystem to be much more competitive, and the quality also increases. So I think I'll end at that because I see Karen as video has come on, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I'm sorry if I cut you short, but actually it looks like you only had one slide, yes, which is perfect. I think, questions for groups, please put them in the chat and then we'll address them in one go. I'd want now to move to you, Sarah Wasonga, who is the Program Officer on Transparency and Access to Information at Article 19. You'll definitely be touching on your data on the varieties of democracy work, and because they include a qualitative element to develop the model. How is this critical? How is this data critical in the conversation that we're having on citizen-generated data, but obviously also sharing your lessons and why this data source is of importance to you. I will not repeat myself, but I will. When you see me come on video, you know that you have like a minute or two to wrap up.
Okay. Thank you very much, Karen. Again, as she said, my name is Sarah Wesonga. I work with an institution called Article 19, where I support Article 19's work on the right to freedom of expression and information, with the focus on transparency and access to information, as well as sustainable development and anti-corruption in the African region. And so Article 19 is an institution that was named after Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It basically asserts to everyone having the right to freedom of expression and information, and the right to be able to disseminate this information across the world, regardless of frontiers. And so this engagement today is very much important to not only the work that we do, but when you talk about human rights and fundamental rights, and the interlinkages with sustainable development goals across, across the globe, because these two go hand in hand. And so at Article 19, our key objective is basically basically to promote and safeguard the right to freedom of expression and access to information across the globe, with an aim to ensure people everywhere can freely express themselves and actively engage in public life without fear of discrimination. Freedom of expression generally is a fundamental human right, and it's regarded as a key pillar of democracy. You cannot speak about democracy without freedom of expression, because it is this right that allows the free exchange of ideas and opinions as well as information, and meaning it allows citizens across the board, or rather all members of society, to be able to form their own opinions on issues of public importance by supporting public debate, free and independent media, and then informed citizenship. And let's say, like in the case of Kenya, having the right information, having the right knowledge about the performance of government, the dealings of government, media freedom allows us to make informed choices, particularly around this time where we have about 24 days to the election. So this information is very critical in allowing citizens to be able to speak with one voice, or rather to make informed decisions. And so for the purposes of citizen-generated data, Article 19 annually publishes what we call an annual report called the Global Expression Report. And so this is a global data-informed annual look at freedom of expression and information worldwide. And as Karen mentioned in the introduction, is that the metric that we use to measure the right to freedom of expression is informed by what we call the Varieties of Democracy dataset, or the VDEM dataset. The thing is that there are very many aspects of democracy worldwide, and a number of them are quite difficult to observe. You're not able to observe all aspects of this. And so this dataset that was developed by the VDEM Institute, it helps, it's more of an innovative method of aggregating expert judgments, or rather including subjective data, in a way that sort of produces valid and reliable estimates on especially difficult to observe concepts. As we said, we cannot be able to observe all aspects of democracy. And so while the majority of the indicators in the VDEM dataset are based on factual information, mainly obtained from like official documents like constitutions, government records, or administrative records, this dataset also includes subjective assessments on topics like democratic and governing practices, as well as compliance with digital rules, meaning we basically do assessments on this compliance with regards to international human rights best practices and standards. And this is very critical because many key features of democracy are not directly observable. And so the Varieties of Democracy dataset, or what we call the VDEM dataset, includes more than 600 indices and indicators that give, or rather measure, different aspects of democracy across the board, and give us an insight on the same. So when Article 19 produces the Global Expression Report, we select 25 indicators from this data set which match our broad understanding on the right to freedom of expression. And as you can see on the screen, these are just some indicators that we are tied most closely to what we are looking at when we talk about freedom of expression across the board. And so in producing our report, we take the 25 indicators. In producing our report, we do have a look at these 25 indicators and create a score between 0 to 100 for each country. And each score places the specific country in an expression category. And so this report, or rather our analysis and the data that we collect, measures just how free each person is to express themselves, for them to communicate, and how free are they to participate in society. This also includes the freedom to post online, the freedom to take to the streets, to investigate and access general information that is needed to keep leaders and government accountable. And this data also measures whether people can do this without fear of harassment or legal repercussions of violence. And so it allows us, once this is assessed, it allows us to place each specific country in a specific category with regards to how it's faring on democracy with an insight on freedom of expression. So a country can either be in crisis, it can be highly restricted, depending on the score. We could consider it restricted, less restricted, or open in those 5 expression categories. And so this data is very instrumental because it paints a picture of how all countries, each country is faring when it comes to democratic governance. For instance, our Global Expression Report for 2022, which was launched earlier this year, paints a very bleak picture. Currently, only 15% of the global population, that is about one in 7 people, live in a country where they can seek, receive, or even share information freely and safely. And this is quite alarming because it means the level of democracy that we are currently enjoying is back to where it was in 1989. And so being aware that human rights and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development go hand in hand, because are inseparable, because SDGs are explicitly grounded in international human rights. I think the 17 goals, seek to realize human rights for all. And this is because about 90% of the targets directly reflect an element of international human rights standards, or a level of international human rights or labor standard. This means that you cannot separate the two. So if we are talking about implementing or achieving or monitoring sustainable development goals, human rights and the SDGs go hand in hand. And this is also why we focus on the right to freedom of expression, is because this right is an enabler for other rights. You can't achieve certain rights without affirming the right to freedom of expression. It is an enabler for economic, social, cultural rights, like the right to education, the right to take part in cultural life, the right to vote, right to scientific progress. All this cannot happen when on the right to freedom of expression. And so we believe this data has a potential to not only bridge accountability, but the monitoring and implementation gap of SDGs by aligning them with human rights, because a lot of the times when we look at the right to freedom of expression, we look at reporting in line with regional and international, human rights instruments. So this, having this data gives us an opportunity to consolidate and to coordinate and implement these two simultaneously. And that's basically an overview of what we do. And I see Karen's screen is back on, so thank you so very much for the opportunity. And I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was short and concise. And I think the last slide where you're actually talking about the indicators in the report and in the VDEM really aligned to the SDG indicator framework. And I think that's some of those, the SDGs measure some of those indicators. So I think it's a very natural alignment. Questions for Sarah for Article 19, please put them in the chat and then we'll address them all together. I want now to move to Benjamin Cherabu from the Open Institute. Open Institute has been championing open data and citizen data for the longest time possible. I think, what are some of the lessons you've drawn in this process, and which other civil society organizations can learn around producing quality, producing timely data? Benjamin, you have 10 minutes and my video will come up when you have 2 minutes to go.
Good afternoon to all. I hope you can hear me. So first of all, I'm glad to be in this meeting. I think it's an opportune time to, as we're discussing about citizen-generated data, that we are finding, the importance of it, and even how we are collaborating with the NSOs or other partners to highlight the importance of it. As Karen has mentioned, my name is Benjamin Charagu. I work with the Open Institute, which was founded in 2012. And since then, we've been working actively around data and
I think we've lost your connection,
informing.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm on just come from one of those same activities in Nandi County. Sorry about it. So I hope I'll be clear as we continue. As I mentioned, I work with Open Institute, and our mission basically is to work with organizations, government, citizens, other partners to build tools, to build knowledge, policies, so that we can give a voice, to citizens and our society, in enabling them to build and develop in their societies. So as you asked, the challenges to be over time, I'll just give a few. One is around capacity. One of the things that we've found that has been our challenge is the capacity of the people that we're working with. Be it government, be it citizen, we find data as a component itself. People don't understand it. They don't understand how to use it. They don't understand how to collect it. They don't understand how to process it. So it becomes of a challenge when you're talking about data and how it's going to be useful to them, to enable them make better decisions, and be able to use it as evidence in the various activities that is key to their work. Most of the areas that we found, as a challenge regarding the same is having, the priorities around data being met. What I mean is, you find, like even government, you'll find they have, other priorities in their work, in their projects, in their programs, but data will not feature in those areas. Which now drives into second point, which is policy formulation and support of the same, which hinders in terms of how do we collect that data and keep on sustaining it, so that we're able to collect real-time or on-time data that is going to support in the decision making, especially we're talking about budgeting, we're talking about decision making. We find also that because there's no policy, we find that even working with other stakeholders, for example, Open Institute working with groups, becomes of a challenge because we don't know how we're going to interact. In some cases, because we are funded differently, we find that there's a challenge in sharing that data. In some cases, we find there's a competitiveness, or seeing that the data is going to be used to fund other people and then miss out on that market. So it becomes of a challenge in terms of how do we ensure that the data that has been collected can be used by somebody else. Hence, also reducing the fatigue of data collection or management of it, where citizens are concerned, because in some cases you find people will go to the field or go to the same citizen to collect similar data, and hence they'll find that in some cases people will have to resort to using other incentives to activate the interest or activate the citizens to produce the data. Of course, it has its own negative effects, where you find even the data that is being collected might be might be false or might not be correct. As I mentioned about incentives, which also falls in now to my third point, we find that duplicate aspects of data. And I think going forward is one of the things that even working with KNBS is going to be of an advantage of good, good ethic in terms of the data that we collect, as long as it has met, the criteria that that has been produced with KNBS and other stakeholders, is going to assist at least other people accessing that data and being able to remove that aspect of being able to make it more useful and building on it, making it official, making it in being able to be used for other developmental and engagements. For now, I think, Karen, I will stop at this point. And just continue supporting in terms of the other questions that you may bring up as we build on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Benjamin, and thanks for making time to join this meeting in spite of being in another engagement. So thanks for that. I think you've touched on some key important issues around sustaining CGD organization budgets, priorities, donors are different. That's the nature of the beast. We can't hide from it. So what sort of mechanisms can we put in place to help us sort of do more coordination and seeing how we align our priorities across organizations? And I think also that, which is linked also, is on the duplication of efforts. Because of different priorities, different donors, the risk is, duplicating data collection efforts, which in the end is not efficient, because then resources are locked up, which could be used for other data priorities. So I think that's a conversation that we can have around. So how do you try and solve some of these issues that civil society organizations go through, and of course the capacity issue. I want to move to the last speaker, Agnes Gakuru from the Africa Voices Foundation. Your work on CGD has mainly been using radio and SMS to collect quantitative and qualitative data. And how has this data contributed to your view on using CGD to actually close data gaps and some of the challenges of quality aspects that it comes with is good to bring to the fore. So I'll give you 10 minutes also, Agnes, and then after that we'll open for questions and answers. Participants, I kindly request you to put your questions on the chat, and then we can come to that after Agnes's presentation. Over to you, Agnes.
Thank you. I'll take a moment to show my face so that you have a voice to the name this time, but I'll switch off immediately because I'm experiencing a poor network, if you may allow, so that we can hear each other well. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm quite glad, or must applaud KNBS for the tremendous work and efforts put in building credibility or acceptance for the citizen-generated data. I think for a long time, NGOs like us and others have, noted the lack of appreciation for the citizen-generated data. And so with that in mind, and reaching a point whereby now we can speak of guidelines, we can speak of criteria, and KNBS championing this across Africa, I think it's quite remarkable and very encouraging for us particularly who are, key players in this regard. Sorry, can you see my screen fully?
Not fully, you'll just need to put on slideshow, but that
Okay.
should work.
Okay, 1 minute, sorry.
Slideshow. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll touch on interactive radio. We are Africa's Voices Foundation. Our approach is basically called interactive radio method. And I'm Agnes Gakuro, in charge of program management. And of course, program management goes hand in hand with data and monitoring and evaluation. And so glad to speak to you this afternoon. As Karen has suggested, we will touch on our methodology, but particularly the contributions on data gaps and quality challenges that come with it. Before I go into specific issues around the data gaps and the quality challenges, it's important for us to have a little background on what exactly we do. Africa's Voices is an NGO, like the rest of my colleagues who have spoken previously. We are quite informed or inspired by the voices or citizen voices prioritization. And we do this through 3 key pillars or 3 key approaches that allows us to collect data in essence. So we work with media and apply a very bespoke type of technology whereby we air programs, and in the process of airing programs through radio, we are able to deploy SMS-based research where we ask questions and audiences respond to the questions. And these questions are then collected via the technology infrastructure that we have that allows us to group the data and analyze, giving us both qualitative and quantitative data. Quantitative data is mostly generated from the demographic disaggregation, which are standard or based on the demand or need of a particular organization. So this is in summary. I will not go into the detail, but the process is very clear, where we co-design with the organizations in need of the data. And we then apply the media partner who is working with us, may it be radio, and sometimes even social media. And then we lead those conversations and deploy the SMS free shortcode, where people now can engage on the question that we are asking. And then the sort of collection of the messages, which are then coded in the specific languages that have been spoken to us. We have local researchers who understand the language the citizens are speaking to us in, and we code the language in thematic groups and then make sense of it, as I explained earlier. And so going to the specific sort of question, I don't think we are very far from what Dennis and Benjamin shared earlier to some extent. There are, data gaps, we feel, obviously, and these are quite well known in terms of allowing for, community participation or consultation, and so increasing inclusion of those voices perhaps who will not be consulted widely, and their voices being part and parcel of planning and decision making. For us, I think this is quite important, and we can see the need of involving citizens, because this creates, in essence, the ownership in driving social change. You need the citizens' involvement. You need the ownership. In strengthening accountability, you need communities to participate and demand and understand what their prioritizations are. So for us, that is key. But again, just like the previous speaker, the complementarity of the data in allowing in-depth nuances of the qualitative data to support or make the quantitative findings more clear and more to be understood better, I think for us that also stands out. And then in the complementary sort of function, we find this citizen-generated data from our method also useful in supporting official data. But this is a caveat, of course, if the quality criteria is adhered. And now that we have the guidelines and have the criteria very clear, I think there's room for us to go back and reflect and strengthen our methodology to sort of be able to meet some of this criteria set. We are speaking this because I think KNBS is familiar that we did submit some of our data set on antimicrobial resistance that we partnered with the global partnerships to produce. And also, I think the other point is on, sorry, there's someone speaking. I don't know if they can mute so that we have one meeting. It's also very useful data when you have to sort of use it in parallel or support other traditional research methods. With the example of the antimicrobial resistance project, we deployed this and strengthened this with the focus group discussions and key informant interviews. I think sometimes multiple sort of research methods or collection, data collection methods do have a stronger sort of complementarities, but also comparison function within the data sets that are produced. And of course, it's very useful in the formative stages, specifically in program design or even planning within the government to know what exactly should be prioritized. And I think for us, the other gap is the immediacy and scale. This comes in terms of how fast this data can be generated. The traditional surveying methods or other methods have, been at times quite tedious and involving quite, a long duration of time to successfully collect and analyze. But the fact that we have a special technology that allows quick collection as well as grouping and analysis, I think this puts this or addresses the issue of delays. I think most of us can identify with the data or research coming at a point where perhaps you've already started implementation and you're still figuring out or understanding what your baselines were. So yes, you need active planning, but the method does display quite some strong strength in the period it takes. But also in terms of the large scale conversations, if you have or partnering with a very wide footprint kind of radio partner, a radio partner with a wide footprint, you are able to draw large conversations and so have very big samples for you to sort of have the scale of representation of the voices or the perceptions held by different people. And straight to the data quality challenges, again, not very new. We've talked about incompatibility and how this sometimes could be limiting if not compatible with the criteria set. Now that we have a criteria, I think this is quite important to be adhered. If not, then the lack of credibility or the question on credibility comes. And I think it has also been mentioned here on some of the indicators or outcomes not quite aligning with the SDG outcomes. And that also speaks to the incompatibility and how that needs to be sort of, spoken, but also agreed and negotiated with the development arms as well as, government. In terms of tools and capacity, we also experience this, the ability to collect, interpret, and contextualize the data, both from the collector, who is us, and those in need, those we are collecting on behalf or working with. It needs to be quite a collaborative process, and the capacity is often a challenge because sometimes one party could not see or cannot see the value or understand how to sort of interpret and contextualize to have
to create meaning for their own work. So this is also quite important and worth advocating and building for us to address the quality issue. Also sample size, for us, our sample size is often not representative, and because the participation is really voluntary, we air programs and people can feel free to engage with us. And so it's quite limiting to for those who are only literate and those with mobile phones to participate. So those without and those illiterate perhaps could be excluded, although there is other ways or methods we are deploying to engage those. But for us, that there's a lot of questions around the representation and sample size and how we draw that. And often we are not able to, or rather the method doesn't allow. In terms of demographic cross-tabulation, it's only possible with a reasonable sample size. So in areas where media footprint or radio footprint is quite small, then you find there are challenges. And again, the ambiguity of the issues we are presenting. We had quite a challenge on antimicrobial. You'll get the same with agricultural issues because some of them are scientific. And so the responses you get will be quite irrelevant at times. There is a verification limitation and as well as the frequency of engagement. If you keep engaging for quite a long time, without breaks or without creativity in the media formats that you're deploying, you could cause fatigue and affect the quality of data. And verification, of course, is limited because some of this data is funded or driven by donor-specific demands, and so not able to access it for verification purposes, and of course, lack of harmonization, which has also been mentioned with other CSOs. And perhaps this is something that can be, built going forward as we have spoken, because it will reduce on duplication of efforts at large. So thank you, Karen. I hope I haven't taken much time.
No, thanks so much, Agnes, and thanks for just your, the reality of the data that you collect and the limitations. I think that was really honest and candid of you. We have a question from Redwani around how do we ensure we coordinate when it comes to data collection. And I think it links really well to the question I had for each of the speakers. We'll start with you, Dennis, then Sarah, Agnes, and then Sarah, Benjamin, and then Agnes. If there was one thing from where you sit as a civil society organization, there's one thing that you feel should change when it comes to CGD in the country, what would that be? And I want you to think about that thing at two levels, between the National Statistical Office and the civil society, and among civil society organizations. So what's that? I guess now that's two things. So what are the things that you'd want to change, like most urgent for you from where you work, that need to change when the National Statistical Office and civil society organizations are working on citizen-generated data and among civil society organizations? And I think that will answer Ridwani's question around coordination. I think that would be one thing that we'd want to change, coordination around data collection. So Dennis, we'll start with you, come to Sarah, Benjamin, and then Agnes, and you each have about 2 minutes and then we wrap up.
Okay, thank you so much, Karen. I think when you look at civil society engagement amongst themselves, one of the biggest challenges that exists is lack of consultation. So we find that we are doing the same things or more or less the same things in the same counties or within the same geographical regions, but then we never talk about it, we never engage, unfortunately saying that we have our own objectives or donors have different objectives. So I think one thing that really needs to change among civil society organizations, and particularly when it comes to the collection of data and doing research, is consultations amongst themselves to be able to pull together resources, to be able to collect quality data together. That way then we have a better opportunity to be able to fulfill the criteria that we have developed jointly. Because one of the biggest challenges with data collection, of course, is resources. And why some people say they don't go to the Bureau for a sampling frame is because they envision as if the sampling frame will be huge and they do not have resources to do that. So one, if we are able to work together, consult each other, try to develop tools that bring us together and collect data simultaneously for both of our needs, then we have a better opportunity. When we look at our engagement between civil society organizations and our CSOs, I think the most important one is trust. I think many people still have fear of writing to the Director General and requesting that they get support. And once you write and you realize that you can actually easily get that support, then it ceases, that fear ceases. So I think many organizations are still living in the era where government does its own things and civil society organizations do their own things, but we have an opportunity to be able to work together. So I'll get it up to that. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thanks, James. Dennis, sorry. Thanks, Dennis. Sarah, you're next.
Thank you, Karen, for that. And I think basically the whole idea is that structured coordination that Denise has also alluded to. A lot of the times, as we said, a number of CSOs, we tend to focus on, the donor requirements and very specifically to our key objectives, depending on the on the project that we're trying to implement. So, trying to, as much as possible to figure out some sort of structured coordination, not just to limit the duplication of efforts or rather the duplication of interventions, but also to enrich the quality of the data that we are collecting to enrich our interventions. And yeah, that's basically it for the first point. And I think this is something that cuts across the board. The second question for me, with regards to engagement between KNBS or government and civil society, would be to consider expanding, the quality assurance provisions to appraise like alternative sources of data. I think at the moment the quality criteria is very much on quantitative data, and it doesn't allow for, or rather at the moment it's very limited, so it doesn't appraise alternative sources of data like subjective data. And also on the same, this is not just the engagement with civil society and KNBS, but all of us in this space at large, is the consideration to like broaden the base of stakeholders when it comes to this engagements, because a number of times even when churning out the data that we are producing, it's deemed very elitist. So it's not very useful to other civil societies, and other actors are not very keen on how they could be able to use this data in their daily lives or in their jobs. And also we tend to see the same faces in the same gatherings. So it see how then we can create that awareness and broaden the base of stakeholders. But so far KNBS has done a commendable job, and that I'm really grateful and hopeful and optimistic for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think I'm also challenged with that. How do we make data not to be just elitist, left for a few organizations who can, break down these issues? So I think, that challenge, I think, also applies to me. I'll come to you, Benjamin, but I also want to check James and Paul, if you want to come in after Agnes with some key parting shots. I'll give you that chance, but let's start with you, Benjamin, and then Agnes.
Yeah, I think Dennis and Sarah have articulated well these areas that I wanted to speak as a second one as well. And the only addition I can build on is the creation of demands, useful data that is going to be geared or directed to the citizens. Because most of the cases, you'll find that donors or CSOs will come with their own agenda trying to mitigate issues that don't necessarily are priority to the citizen. So that demand, that engagement, I think is key, and it will be useful to, as Dennis has mentioned, to consult with the end user. Even for government, especially when CSOs come in, because mostly we come in to support. We do sometimes have our own agenda that sometimes may not align, which is natural, which is what we do. Because of the work that we do, you'll find somebody will just support maybe agenda initiative. Somebody else will do maybe agricultural or something like that. But at the end of the day, what are the issues that maybe government or issues that other stakeholders will require, so that we give the most resource that is required to where it's needed. I think also building on Sarah regarding to KNGS is the policies that we are working with. As we are building, it's good that we have most of them, or at least we have thought about them as we continue working around this particular topic. Things like data protection as well is something that has been taking traction. So the issue is, how do we use that with the data that we're collecting to ensure that people are protected, or the data is protected, and how do we store it? How do we manage it in a way that everybody knows there is a standard to encompass that. So for me, that's what I had at the moment.
Thanks, Benjamin. Over to you, Agnes.
Yeah, thanks, Karen and previous speakers. I think my observation or a point I will share is not very far from what the rest have said. I think there is need for us to review the sort of criteria with KNBS. I think the CSOs and KNBS need to really work hand in hand to understand what this need for data and whether that can be expounded a little bit to sort of create better understanding, but also create room for most data to be useful. And also, I think between the CSOs themselves, there has been quite high competition amongst CSOs and NGOs, and as we all know, different organizations perhaps tackle different or similar thematic areas. And for that reason, there has to be encouraged. We need to be encouraged, but also encourage each other to come together and really have review sessions, peer review sessions, lessons or learning sessions. I saw this working very well in the Somalia space during COVID, where different organizations producing data would come and compare and see what is your data saying compared to another organization, which was very interesting. I think FCDO was coordinating that. If there's room to have those peer exchanges or peer review exchanges, I think that will be quite awesome. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Agnes. Paul, I want to check if you want to come in and then we'll finish with James.
Okay, thanks, Karen. I think for me, it's just a summary. I think I only have 3 things to highlight. One of them has been raised by Sarah. So we need to start thinking about data use. So how do we disseminate these reports? How are we targeting do we really think about different audience? So that's something that we need to do. And perhaps that way we'll be able to resolve this issue of having what she called elitist data. And then the other thing that's very critical is we need to continue building trust. That is, I think NBS has open arms, and it will continue having open arms with regard to this agenda. And I liked that James' presentation actually talked about alternative sources of data. He didn't say CGD, and there's an argument to that. So and also the other thing that's important related to this is the need for us to push for the formulation of the technical working group on CGD. So as I had mentioned earlier, there are challenges. So if there are organizations that can partner and support KNBS in this undertaking, that would be really welcome. And then the third thing is we need to continue aligning data production with national indicators in consultation with KNBS. I liked what, I think it was Dennis who had mentioned that some organizations are afraid that the sampling frame, they may not have the resources to actually do data and meet coverage. And I think there's need for, even if that doesn't happen, I think it's also important to start understanding the process. Like what does it take? What's the time that you need? You start building relationships with KNBS, you know, as an organization, because right now, yes, there's the umbrella of this particular project, but are the organizations starting to build their own individual relationships with the Bureau? I think that's quite necessary, even as they continue enhancing the data the CGD data producers inventory. Yeah, so on their side, I think communication will happen, but also for the producers of alternative data, I think there's need to deliberately start forming these relationships with the Bureau. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. James, over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Maybe my parting shot, I would say in Kiswahili, umoja ni nguvu. And that is to mean you cannot exist in vacuum. We need each other in the whole process of statistics value chain. This will help us in avoiding duplication of efforts. You find that you're collecting data which is already existing, and it will also help us in building capacity in case you lack capacity in some areas. If you seek out for help, I believe you'll find an institution that is going to support you. KNBS, as usual, being a government arm, is available. We are approachable, as I said. We are having open arms, and in this regard, I said we have been working with various CSOs. One of them is Twaweza, and all the times before they undertake any survey, they have to approach KNBS, and we have always supported them. Many times, Dr. Emmanuel calls me, I guide him even on phone on how to design the survey that they are undertaking. And therefore, I would say that we are available to also help the CSOs that are willing to support them in designing their survey. Recently, as a result of the meeting which we had at Mombasa, Anne from Cruz invited me together with my colleagues in a meeting where they were conceiving a project that they want to undertake data collection in. And we participated in that meeting. We brought in our thoughts here and there. And we agreed that they are going to send to us the document that has their thoughts so that we can also enrich it in terms of the design. So we are available, we are approachable. Please get hold of me, get hold of KNBS. A number of you have my number. You can call me. I will help you in case you're stuck in the process. I will show you where to drop your letter in the DG's office or any KNBS officer. I know a number of us are here. I believe they're going in case you're operating in the counties. We have in each and every county a statistics office. You can walk into the office, into those offices, and I believe they will not chase you away, but they will receive you in open arms. And where they're not sure what to do with your request, I believe they will consult us, and we shall be able to help. And they are equally capable to support you in whichever way through the Director General. So thank you, Karen, and back to you.
Thank you so much, James. I'll just request you to stay like another 2 minutes or 3 participants so that we can do the closing remarks. It's been a very interesting 2 hours on a Friday afternoon. I've really enjoyed this discussion and just the rich knowledge and work that organizations have been doing with CGD. I think Kenya definitely has matured and is the gold standard when it comes to CGD, both from civil society perspective, but also with the National Statistical Office. So it's been a real pleasure. I want to hand over to Florence to just give some closing remarks as we end this webinar.
Thank you very much, Karen. I think mine is just to confirm that today's objectives have been met. I think for us as the SDG for Kenya Forum, we wanted to ensure that we can build capacity, especially for civil society organizations within this conversation on alternative data sources, citizen-generated data. And I believe today's 2-hour session has really showcased, like what is it that we need to be doing through the KNBS presentations and the question and answer sessions, but also it's been good that civil society organizations have also been able to showcase the work they are doing, the innovation, the creativity, the thinking out of the box that is going out, and also how to merge that within the partnerships. And I like what James talked about in terms of continued partnerships that are already ongoing, and also for us to encourage conversations beyond just the Zoom meetings. I think and I believe it's time for us to really meet KNBS officials continuously when we have different research. When you're doing research, it's good for us to reach out and to be able to get to receive that guidance, but also to utilize the guidelines that are already with us as civil society organizations. And so just as we conclude, I believe that it's important for us as different sectors to ensure that we can contribute to the SDG targets and indicators reporting through the citizen-generated data sets. And I believe all of us and those that are keen on issues of data, we're already investing, quality information, or we are already involved in different methodologies that can bridge this gap. And so just to encourage more and more civil society organizations, those that are not already actively involved in this conversation, this is open to all of us. And so if your organization is involved in various research or in data and statistics, we are open to, just introducing you or ensuring that you can be part and parcel of this conversation. And also to say that Kenya will be reporting in 2023 for the voluntary national review. And so it's very timely for us to start this conversation to ensure that more and more civil society organizations can actually come on board to showcase the work they are doing, but also align it to specific targets and SDG indicators. So I believe that has been something that the forum has really been, pushing for all of us to do. And lastly, the issues of evidence-based advocacy, implementation, and monitoring and review, because this is what our role is as civil society organizations. And so I believe this has been very timely, and it's a continuous conversation. And so as I come to a conclusion, just to appreciate the NSO, Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, for being with us, for having an active partnership, and also really investing a lot of time, but also resources to ensure that civil society organizations and other non-state actors can come forth and can be able to can be able to generate information or data sources that you can consider for national, just reporting. And also to thank the entire team. I know the KNBS team was here with us, and the support they continuously are giving to all of us as civil society organizations. Paris 21, also our good partner, Liliana and Paul, Dr. Paul Mongai. Thank you very much for, always making time, and also for the great resources and support that you're providing for the civil society organizations. Karen, thank you for moderating this session. It's always a pleasure, and also for always looking out and also guiding all of us in terms of what are the conversations, not at national level, but also in the region and at global level. We appreciate that kind of resource and technical expertise that you provided to all of us. And then to the speakers, Gurut's Article 19, Open Institute, African Voices, thank you very much for sharing your experiences, and also for just a vibrant session. And it's good always to know the kind of work you're doing, and also giving voice to civil society mandate. And maybe to Festus, Ellen, Winnie, and Medika, thank you for the SDG staff that have been supporting this convening. And also Festus is the one that is leading us in the data work. And all the participants today that joined and have actively stayed with us until this hour. Thank you very much. Karen, thank you.
Thank you, Florence. And with that, I wish to end this meeting and to wish you all a nice weekend. I hope you have a restful time. and looking forward to future conversations. Thanks and bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.